By the time Nora Marsh was 19 years old, she owned exactly one thing in the world that was truly hers, and she had paid $10 for it. It was a boarded-up arcade on a dying boardwalk in a town called Sable Point, and everyone who knew about it agreed it was worth less than the $10 she gave for it. The building had been condemned for more than a year. The front windows were covered with sheets of gray plywood, screwed down at the corners and swollen at the edges from the salt air. Someone had spray-painted a red X on the door, the kind the fire department used to mark a structure they would not enter. The roof sagged in the middle like a tired back. When the wind came off the water at night, the whole place made a low sound, a kind of breathing, and people on the boardwalk had stopped hearing it years ago, the way you stop hearing a clock. Nora had $47 when she stepped off the bus in Sable Point. After she paid for the arcade, she had $37. She had no phone that worked, one duffel bag with a broken zipper, a pair of sneakers with the left sole coming loose, and a body that had not slept lying down in 11 days. She was not looking for treasure. She was looking for a wall to put her back against and a roof that would not leak, and the arcade offered both, and it cost less than a sandwich. She did not know, when she pried the plywood loose from the side door and slipped into the dark, that behind the prize counter, behind the pegboard shelves that still held a few faded stuffed animals and a row of plastic prize numbers, there was a room that had been sealed for more than a year. She did not know that inside that room were things worth more than every building on the boardwalk put together. She did not know that one of the photographs pinned to the wall of that room was a picture of her own mother, 23 years old, standing behind that same prize counter, laughing at something outside the frame. She would learn all of that during the worst heat wave the coast had seen in 40 years. But before any of that, before the sealed room and the coins and the ledger and the man named Emmett Cade who had spent 51 years quietly holding a whole town on his back, we need to go back a little. We need to start with how a 19-year-old girl with $47 ended up owning a condemned building that a tired old man signed over to her for $10, just to be free of it. Nora Marsh had aged out of foster care 3 months before, on her 18th birthday, though the paperwork took until spring to catch up with her. She had been in the system since she was 5 years old. She did not remember much before that. She remembered a woman's voice, low and even reading to her in the dark. She remembered the smell of sugar and hot oil, though she could never place where. She remembered a string of colored lights, red and yellow and green, though when she tried to hold the memory still, it slid away from her like water. What she had instead of memories was a case file. It followed her from home to home, a manila folder that grew thicker every year, and by the time she was old enough to read it, most of it was about her. Placement dates, reasons for removal, a note from a caseworker when she was 9 that said Nora is quiet but not withdrawn, observant, does not ask for things. That last line had followed her all her life. She did not ask for things. She had learned early that asking got you noticed, and being noticed got you moved. And being moved meant packing your life into a black garbage bag again and starting over somewhere new, where nobody knew your name and nobody wanted to. The one fact she had about her own beginning was her mother's name, printed on the intake form, Colleen Marsh, deceased. Under cause of death, someone had typed a single word Nora had to look up, aneurysm. There was no father listed. There was no other family. There was a line for last known address, and it said only a county, not this one, and a town that no longer had a name Nora could find on any map she checked. She had spent her whole childhood being told, gently and not so gently, that her mother had left her. That was the story the Holmes told each other. This one's mother took off. It was easier than the truth, maybe, or it was just what people assumed when a 5-year-old showed up alone. Nora had stopped correcting it by the time she was 10, because correcting it meant explaining, and explaining meant she had to say the word aneurysm out loud, and every time she did, some adult would soften and look at her with pity, and pity was the one thing worse than being ignored. So she got small. She got careful. She learned to make herself useful in a house without making herself needed, which is a very fine line, and she walked it for 13 years. And then she turned 18. and the state of her life, which had been a folder passed from hand to hand, was suddenly her own to carry, and there was no one on the other side of the desk anymore. They gave her a checklist when she aged out. Independent living. There was a name for it, and a pamphlet, and a caseworker named Denise, who meant well and had 40 other kids. There was supposed to be a housing voucher. The voucher fell through. A funding gap, Denise said, a thing at the state level, nothing personal. And the transitional apartment Nora had been promised went to a girl whose situation was deemed more urgent, and Nora did not argue, because she never argued, and by June she was sleeping in the back of a laundromat in a city 200 miles from anywhere she had ever lived, feeding quarters into a dryer so the attendant would think she was a customer and let her stay warm. She had a little money. Not much. She had worked, off and on, whenever a placement lasted long enough, stocking shelves, bussing tables, folding shirts in a discount store. She was a good worker. Managers liked her because she showed up and shut up and did the thing twice if they asked. But good work does not add up fast at $9 an hour, and every dollar she saved got eaten by a bus ticket or a bad week, and by the time the laundromat attendant told her, not unkindly, that she couldn't keep sleeping there, Nora Marsh had $47 folded in the inside pocket of her duffel bag and no idea where to go. She went to Sable Point because of a name on the back of a photograph. There was exactly one photograph in her file that was hers, that was from before. Everything else was documents, but tucked in the very back, in a plastic sleeve that had gone cloudy with age, there was a single small picture, 3 inches by 5, with a white border and rounded corners the way old drugstore prints used to have. It showed a young woman standing behind a counter. There were shelves behind her stacked with prizes, stuffed bears and toy cars and something that might have been a goldfish in a bag. The woman was maybe 23. She had Nora's chin and Nora's straight, dark eyebrows and a smile that Nora did not recognize because she had never once seen it on her own face. On the back, in blue ballpoint, someone had written 4 words and a partial one. Colleen. Starlite. Sable P.T. Nora had looked at that photograph 1,000 times, in the dark of a dozen bedrooms that were not hers, holding a flashlight under a blanket so no one would tell her to go to sleep. She had memorized the woman's face, the way you memorize a word in a language you don't speak, hoping one day someone would translate it for you. Sable P.T. She had figured out, when she was maybe 12, that it meant point, and found the town on a map, a thumbnail on a spit of sand, 3 hours down the coast from the last place she'd been placed. And she had promised herself, in the private way children promise themselves things, that one day she would go there and stand where her mother had stood. She had not planned for it to happen like this. She had imagined going as a visitor, someone with a return ticket and a life to go back to. Instead, she went because she had nowhere else, and $47 in a name that felt, in that moment, like the only address she had ever been given. She spent $19 on the bus. She rode through the night with the duffel bag on her lap and her forehead against the cold window, and she got off at a shelter with a broken bench across from a shuttered custard stand, and the first thing that hit her when the doors opened was the heat. It was the last week of July, and the coast was in the grip of a heat wave that the radio kept calling historic. The word was on every station. Historic. It had been over 100 degrees for 6 days running, and the weather people said it would hold for at least a week more, maybe 2. A dome of hot air parked over the whole seaboard that would not move. The pavement of the boardwalk gave the heat back at you from below. The air did not move at all, and when it did, it came off the water thick and wet and smelling of low tide, and it did not cool you. It only made you feel like you were breathing through a warm rag. Sable Point in that heat was a town holding its breath. Nora had expected a boardwalk like the ones in pictures, crowds, lights, the smell of fried dough. What she found was a place that had mostly given up. Half the storefronts along the boardwalk were boarded like the arcade, plywood gone silver with weather. A carousel sat under a sagging canopy, its horses bleached of color, chained off with a sign that said closed for repairs in letters so old the repairs were clearly never coming. There was a taffy shop with its lights on and its door propped open. There was a bait store. There was a pizza counter run by a man who looked as tired as his awning. And there, near the far end, past the dead carousel, was a long, low building with a peaked roof and a marquee that still said, in cracked plastic letters that had lost half their neon, SRLE, the Starlite. Nora stood in front of it for a long time in the heat with her duffel over her shoulder and her mother's photograph in her hand, holding the picture up and turning it. And there was no mistaking it. The counter in the photograph was inside that building. The shelves were inside that building. Her mother had stood inside that building once and smiled at someone Nora would never get to meet, and now the building was dead and boarded and marked with a red X, and Nora was standing outside it with everything she owned on her back. She might have left it there. A photograph and a ruined building and a coincidence 3 hours down the coast. But the heat made decisions for her that week. That first night she slept in the bus shelter across from the custard stand, sitting up, her duffel chained to her wrist with the strap, and she did not sleep so much as wait for morning with her eyes closed. The heat did not break at night. The concrete held it. By 4 in the morning she was soaked through her shirt and her mouth was dry as paper, and she had drunk the last of the water from the fountain by the bathrooms, which had a sign on it that said non-potable that she had decided to ignore. In the morning she found the taffy shop because it was the only door open, and because a hand-lettered card in the window said help, inquire, though it turned out the card was 4 years old and the woman behind the counter just hadn't taken it down. The woman was in her 70s. Small and square, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and forearms like a woman who had pulled taffy by hand for 50 years, which she had. Her name, painted on the window in gold, was Beaumont's. Her name, she told Nora, was Ida. "You look like something the tide left," Ida said, not unkindly, and she poured Nora a paper cup of ice water from a jug without being asked, which was the first thing anyone had given Nora without her having to earn it in longer than she could remember. Nora drank it in one pull. Ida poured another. Nora did not tell Ida much. She had learned not to. She said she was passing through. She said she was looking for work. Ida looked at her over the reading glasses for a moment, the way a person looks when they are deciding whether to believe you and deciding it doesn't matter. And then she said the shop couldn't pay, but there was a folding cot in the back she was welcome to for a night, on account of the heat, and if she wanted to earn the cot, she could wrap taffy, which was easy and boring and would keep her hands busy. Nora wrapped taffy for 6 hours. She was good at it. Ida watched her hands and said nothing, and refilled the water jug twice. And near the end of the day, when the light through the boarded storefronts had gone orange, and the heat had somehow gotten worse instead of better, Nora asked Ida the only question she had come to Sable Point to ask. "The arcade at the end," she said. "The Starlite. Do you know who owns it?" Ida's hands stopped moving. She looked at Nora for a long moment over the top of her glasses, and something passed behind her eyes that Nora could not read, and then she said, "Nobody anymore. The man who owned it died. Year and some ago, she went back to the taffy. Emmett Cade ran that place 51 years, longer than I've been here, and I've been here forever." She said the name the way people say the name of someone they miss and have decided not to talk about, and Nora, who knew that particular tone very well, did not push. But that night, on the folding cot in the back of the taffy shop, with a box fan pushing hot air over her and the sound of the ocean coming through the wall, Nora thought about the red X on the door of the Starlite, and about a man named Emmett Cade, who had run it for 51 years and then died, and about a building that belonged to nobody anymore. And in the morning she asked Ida a second question, and Ida told her the arcade was not quite nobody's. When Emmett died, it had fallen to his half-brother Vernon, an old man inland who had never set foot on the boardwalk and wanted nothing to do with it, and the town had ordered the wreck torn down at the owner's expense, and Vernon could not pay for a bag of nails, let alone a demolition. That man, Ida said, would hand that building to anybody fool enough to take the weight of it off him. "Why?" Ida asked. "You're not thinking of taking on that wreck." "I want to see inside it," Nora said, which was the truth, and she did not say the rest of the truth, which was that she wanted to stand where her mother had stood, and that she had nowhere to sleep, and that a condemned building with a roof was still a roof. Emmett Cade's half-brother was named Vernon, and Ida had his telephone number in a spiral book held together with a rubber band. She had not called it in years. She called it that evening, standing at the back of the taffy shop with her glasses pushed up into her hair, and she talked low for a long while, and when she hung up, she looked older than she had that morning. Vernon Cade was 83 years old, she said. He lived alone in a rented room in the county seat, on a check that came the 1st of the month and was gone by the 10th. And for the last 14 months, he had been slowly buried by a building he had never wanted and had never once seen. Vernon had inherited the Starlite the way a person inherits a debt. When Emmett died and no one could find the girl the lawyer kept saying the will was for, the estate had stalled, and a condemned building still has to belong to somebody, and Vernon was the only Cade left alive. So the deed had come to him. An old man on a fixed income who woke up one day, the owner of a firetrap 3 towns away that the town of Sable Point had condemned and then ordered torn down at the owner's expense. The demolition estimate was more than $19,000. Vernon did not have $1,900. Every month he could not pay it. The town added another fine, and every few weeks a developer named Dunmore called him and offered to make the whole thing disappear for a signature. And Vernon did not sign, because something about the man's voice on the telephone made his skin crawl, and he could not have told you what. Nora took the bus inland the next morning. It cost her $4 and put her in the county seat a little after 10, and she walked 6 blocks in the heat to a gray house cut up into rented rooms, and Vernon Cade met her on the porch because it was too hot inside. He was a small, dried-out old man in a cardigan, despite the weather, with Emmett's same long face gone soft and papery. Nora told him who she was, that her mother, Nora Marsh, had worked the prize counter at the Starlite years ago, and that she had come to see the place. Vernon went very still. Then he asked her, in a strange, careful voice, what her first name was, and when she said Nora, he sat down heavily in a plastic chair and looked at her for a long time and said he had stopped believing she was real. She did not understand what he meant, and he did not explain it, and it would be days before she did. They did not talk long. He was not a man with much left to say. He told her the land under the arcade was not his to give. It belonged to the town, leased on a long ground lease that ran with the building, 99 years, most of it still to run. But the building itself, the structure, he would sign over to her that day, gladly, for whatever she could pay, because he could not carry it another month, and he would rather it go to Colleen's girl than to the man on the telephone. He had a manila envelope of papers the lawyer had sent him, and among them was a blank quitclaim deed, and Nora filled in her name where he told her to, and he signed his where the little penciled X was, and the woman in the room next door came out and notarized it for $1 and a glass of iced tea. Nora paid him $10. It was almost everything she had that was not food. Vernon tried to give it back, and she would not let him, because a thing you are given and a thing you buy do not sit the same way in a person, and she needed this to be hers. He folded the $10 bill into his shirt pocket without looking at it, and he gave her a paper tag with a single brass key on it that had come to him in a box of his brother's things he had never had the heart to open, and he told her to be careful of the developer. Then he said one more thing, quietly, as she was leaving. He said Emmett had written him once, near the end, a letter he never answered because they had not spoken in 30 years. He said the letter had only one line in it that he could still remember. It said, "If a girl named Marsh ever comes, she is the whole reason." Nora rode the bus back to the coast holding the deed in both hands. Structure only, as is, no warranty. Her name was on it, Nora Marsh. She had never in her life owned anything at all with her name on it. She read it the whole way, and when the bus crossed the causeway onto the spit of sand and she saw the boardwalk and the dead carousel and the marquee that said S. Arlie E. Ark Day, something in her chest that had been clenched tight for as long as she could remember loosened, just slightly, just enough to hurt. The brass key did not fit the front door. It fit a side door, down an alley between the arcade and the boarded custard stand, a metal door swollen in its frame that she had to put her shoulder against 3 times before it gave. The red X was on the front, where the fire department could see it. The side door was just a door. She got it open, and the smell rolled out at her. Hot dust, old sugar, Mildew, machine oil, and under all of it something electric and metallic, the smell of 1,000 old machines that had sat unpowered in the dark for more than a year. She stood in the doorway and let her eyes adjust. Then she stepped inside and pulled the door shut behind her. And for the first time in 11 days, Nora Marsh was standing in a room that belonged to her. Inside, the heat was different. Outside, the sun came at you. Inside, the heat sat, dense and total, trapped under the sagging roof, and it was somehow worse and better at once. Worse because the air did not move at all. Better because it was dark, and dark felt like shade even when it wasn't. Slivers of white daylight came in around the edges of the plywood on the front windows, laying bright stripes across the floor, and in those stripes the dust hung so thick it looked solid. The arcade opened up in front of her, longer than it looked from outside. 2 rows of machines ran the length of it, dead and dark under a skin of gray dust. She walked down the center aisle slowly, and her footsteps were the only sound besides the ocean coming faintly through the walls. There were pinball machines with their glass gone dull, and a row of old upright cabinets with faded art of spaceships and race cars, and a claw machine still half full of stuffed animals gone gray, their little glass eyes catching the light from the window stripes. There was a fortune-telling machine in the corner, a mannequin gypsy behind cracked glass, her painted hand still hovering over a deck of cards, waiting to tell someone their future for a quarter. There was a shooting gallery with tin ducks stopped mid-parade. There was a photo booth with its curtain rotted to threads, and at the far end, under a hand-painted sign that said prizes in letters that had once been gold, there was the counter. Nora knew it before she reached it. She had been looking at it her whole life. It was a long wooden counter, worn pale along its front edge where thousands of hands and elbows and bellies had leaned on it, and behind it rose a wall of shelving, pegboard, painted a green that had faded to the color of old money, fitted with rows of hooks and cubbies and glass cases. Most of the shelves were empty. A few still held prizes, the cheap ones nobody had wanted at closing time, gone stiff and gray. There was a row of little numbered tickets in a dispenser. There was a cash register, an old mechanical one with round keys, its drawer hanging open and empty. She came around behind the counter, and she stood where the woman in the photograph had stood, and she took the photograph out of her pocket and held it up and turned so that the shelves behind her matched the shelves behind the woman, and they matched. The same pegboard, the same green, the same glass cases, though the glass was cracked now. Her mother had stood exactly here. Nora put her back against the shelf, the way her mother's back had been against it, and she slid down until she was sitting on the floor behind the prize counter of a dead arcade she had bought for $10, and she cried for the first time in a very long time, quietly, the way she did everything, so that no one would hear. She slept there that night, on the floor behind the counter, with her duffel for a pillow. It was the best she had slept in 11 days. And in the morning, when the light came up gray around the plywood and she opened her eyes to the underside of the prize shelves, she saw the thing she had not seen in the dark. Low down, at the very back of the shelving unit, behind a row of cubbies, the pegboard did not meet the floor the way the rest of it did. There was a seam, and behind the seam, when she pressed her hand against it, the wall gave, not much, a half-inch, with the hollow give of a board over empty space. Behind the prize counter, there was a room. It took her most of the morning to get into it, and she did it in the heat with her shirt tied up off her stomach and sweat running into her eyes, because she had no fan back there, and the trapped air behind the counter was like the inside of a parked car. The shelving unit was not just shelving. She understood that once she started pulling it apart, it was a false wall. The pegboard had been fitted over an old doorway. She could see the door frame once she pried the first panel loose. A proper wooden frame painted the same faded green, and the whole thing had been screwed down deliberately, the screw heads countersunk and filled and painted over so you would never see them unless you were lying on the floor at dawn with the light coming in sideways. Whoever had sealed this room had not been in a hurry. They had done it carefully, the way you close something you mean to keep closed. That, more than anything, was what made Nora's hands shake as she worked. Not the hope of finding something. The care. Somebody had loved this room enough to hide it well. She had no tools except a flat screwdriver she found in a drawer under the register and a claw hammer she found hanging on a nail by the side door, its handle worn smooth. She worked the screws she could reach and pried the panels she couldn't, and the old wood gave with a sound like a long breath. And by noon she had opened a gap wide enough to put her head and shoulders through, and she clicked on the little flashlight from her duffel and shone it in. The room was small. 6 feet by 8, maybe, a cashier's office tucked behind the prize wall. There was a desk. There was a swivel chair with the stuffing coming out of one arm. There was a wall of shelves, and a tall metal cabinet with a lock, and a window that had been bricked up from outside so that no light came in at all. The air inside was cooler than the arcade, and drier, and it smelled of paper and pipe tobacco and something Nora would later learn was the particular smell of a great deal of old metal, coins, thousands of them, giving off their faint mineral breath in the dark. She squeezed through and stood up inside the room, and she turned the flashlight slowly around the walls, and that was when she saw the photographs. But she did not understand the photographs yet, and I will come back to them, because that is the second thing, and the second thing is the one that broke her open. The first thing she understood was simpler and stranger. On the desk, in the center, squared to the edges the way a careful man squares things, there was a green cloth-bound ledger. Beside it there was a fountain pen, and along the whole back wall, on the shelves, stacked and rolled and boxed with the same patient care as everything else in that room, there was money. But not money the way Nora had ever seen money. There were paper rolls of coins, hundreds of them, the kind banks used to give you, but old, the paper gone soft and brown, each one labeled in a small, precise hand. There were flat blue books with slots in the pages, and in the slots were coins, held behind little plastic windows. There were cigar boxes with rubber bands around them. There were things in small, hard plastic cases that Nora did not have a word for. She picked up one of the rolls. It was heavier than it had any right to be. The label, in blue ink, said Morgan, 1921, UNC, and a number. She did not know what any of it meant. She peeled back the soft paper at one end, and a coin slid into her palm, and it was silver, real silver, heavy and cold even in the heat, with a woman's head in profile on one side and an eagle on the other, and it did not look like it had ever been spent. It looked like it had been made yesterday and set down and never touched. She held it up in the flashlight and turned it, and she thought, in the plain way she thought about most things, this is worth more than $1. She did not yet know it was worth a great deal more than $1. She just knew that a thing that heavy and that clean was not the kind of thing people left behind by accident. She sat down in the swivel chair, which sighed under her, and she put the flashlight on the desk, pointing up so it lit the ceiling and threw a soft glow over the room, and she opened the green ledger. The first page had a name at the top, written in the same small, precise hand as the coin rolls, Emmett Cade, and under it a line that made Nora go very still. This book is a record of what the Starlite owes and what it is owed. If you are reading it, I am gone, and it falls to you to keep the accounts honest. I have tried to. She turned the page. She had expected, if she had expected anything, an account book, columns of quarters and dimes, the arcade's daily take. And there was some of that in the early pages, decades back. But it was not a business ledger. Not really. It was a record of a town. Page after page, in dated entries going back further than Nora had been alive, Emmett Cade had written down what he had done, and what he had done, over 51 years, was hold Sable Point together with his own 2 hands and never let anyone see him do it. Nora read slowly. She was not a fast reader. The homes had not been the kind of places that made you one. But she read that whole first afternoon, sitting in the dead man's chair with a silver dollar warming in her fist, and a picture came together of a man she had never met. March, a year she did the math on and worked out, was 31 years back. Carousel motor seized. Salt in the bearings. Pruitt says he can't make the season without it and can't afford the part. Told him the Starlite had a slow winter and could carry it. Ordered the motor. He'll pay it back when he can. He won't be able to. That's all right. She turned pages. There were dozens like it. Hundreds. The bait shop's roof, after a storm. A fisherman's engine, so he could keep his boat and keep working. A family's heating oil, one bad January, written down only as the Delgados, oil, January, don't mention it. The property taxes on 3 different boardwalk shops, paid quietly through the town so the owners thought the town had simply forgotten to bill them. A boy's dental bill, a widow's back rent, money for a girl to finish a nursing certificate. She'll be the only nurse this town has, and it needs one. Over and over, in that small, even hand, the same pattern. Someone at the end of their rope, and Emmett Cade quietly cutting the rope loose from the anchor and writing it down and telling them not to mention it. And the coins, Nora began to understand, were how he did it. There were entries about those too. Sold 2 of the gold pieces to cover the Pruitt motor and the Delgado oil, wrote a note further on, replaced them in the spring. She did not fully grasp it yet, but she was beginning to. The man had turned the nickels and quarters of a boardwalk arcade, over 51 years, into something that held its value when everything else on that boardwalk fell apart. He had made himself into the town's bank, a bank that never sent a bill and never foreclosed and kept its books in a sealed room behind a prize counter, so that no one in Sable Point ever had to feel the shame of being helped. Nora closed the ledger near supper time and sat in the dark with the flashlight off to save the batteries, and she thought about Ida saying his name in that particular tone. Emmett Cade ran that place 51 years, and about the whole boardwalk out there boarded and dying, and she understood something she could not have put into words. The town had started dying when Emmett Cade died. Not because anyone knew what he had done, because they didn't. Because the man who had been quietly holding the anchor had let go, and no one had even known there was an anchor, and so no one had reached to catch it. She should have felt like a trespasser. She had bought a building for $10 and found a dead man's life's work sealed inside it. But she did not feel like a trespasser. She felt, sitting in that chair in the dark, more at home than she had ever felt anywhere, and she did not know why. And the reason was on the wall 6 inches from her head. In the photographs she had not yet let herself look at closely. In the morning, she looked at them. She had brought a second flashlight battery from the drugstore 2 blocks inland, spending $1.19 she could not spare, because she had not been able to sleep for thinking about the room. And now she stood in front of the wall of photographs with the beam steady, and she made herself look, one picture at a time, from the left. They were pinned to a strip of corkboard that ran the length of the wall above the desk. Dozens of them, and they were not photographs of coins or of the arcade's grand openings or of anything a man might pin up to be proud of. They were photographs of people. The town, 50 years of it. There was a black and white picture of the boardwalk when it was new and crowded and the carousel horses had all their paint. There was a color print gone orange with age of a crowd on the beach. There were children holding up prizes at the counter, gap-toothed, squinting into a flash. There was a man in an apron who might have been Emmett himself, young, dark-haired, standing in front of the marquee when all its letters still lit. And then, near the right end, at eye level, where a person sitting in that chair would see them every single day, there was a cluster of photographs of one woman. Nora knew her before her mind caught up with her body. Her hand went cold around the flashlight. It was the woman from the photograph in her pocket. The same chin, the same straight dark eyebrows, the same smile she had never seen on her own face. But there was not just one picture of her here. There were 9. Nora counted them, later, many times. 9 photographs of Colleen Marsh, pinned to the wall of a sealed room by a man who had chosen to look at her face every day for the rest of his life. In the first, she was young, maybe 19. Nora's own age, standing behind the prize counter in an apron with her sleeves pushed up, caught mid-laugh, one hand raised to push her hair back. In another, she was a little older, kneeling to hand a stuffed bear to a small boy, her face soft with a kind of patience Nora recognized from nowhere in her own life. In another, she stood on the boardwalk at dusk with the lights of the arcade behind her, and she was pregnant, her hand resting on the round of her belly, and she was looking straight into the camera and smiling at whoever held it in a way that made Nora have to sit down on the edge of the desk. Because Nora understood. Looking at that picture, that she was the belly, that she was the person her mother was carrying in that photograph, on that boardwalk, in front of that arcade, 20 years ago, that she had been here before, in the only way a person can be somewhere before they are born. And then there was the last one, at the very end of the row, and it was the one that undid her. It was a photograph of her mother sitting on the prize counter itself, not behind it but up on it, with her legs dangling, and she was holding a baby. The baby was maybe 6 months old, in a yellow onesie, one fat fist reaching up toward her mother's face. And her mother was not looking at the camera in this one. She was looking down at the baby, and her whole face was open in a way that no one is ever supposed to see. The way a face is only when it thinks no one is watching. And on the white border at the bottom, in blue ballpoint, in the same hand that had written Colleen, Starlite, Sable PT. On the back of Nora's own photograph, someone had written, Colleen and Nora, June. Her name. Her mother's handwriting, or maybe Emmett's. She did not know yet, but her name, written 20 years ago, in this room, under a photograph of herself as a baby in her mother's arms on the counter of the Starlite arcade. Nora Marsh had spent her whole life being told, gently and not so gently, that her mother had left her, that she was a girl whose mother took off. Out of a case file and a single cloudy photograph and one word she had to look up, she had built the only story she had, that she had come from nowhere and belonged to no one, and always would. And here, sealed in a room behind a prize counter in a dead arcade she had bought for $10, was the proof that none of it was true. She had not come from nowhere. She had come from here. Her mother had stood at this counter and laughed and handed children their prizes and carried Nora on this boardwalk and sat right there, 6 feet from where Nora was sitting now, and held her and looked at her the way that Face was looking. And somebody had loved them both enough to keep 9 pictures of it on the wall for 20 years in the dark. She did not read the ledger that day. She sat on the floor of the room with the photographs above her, and she stayed there until the strip of daylight around the plywood went gold and then gray and then black, and she let herself, for the first time in 19 years, be a person who had come from somewhere. It was the next day that she found the pages about herself and about her mother and understood what the room was for. She had been reading the ledger front to back, the way you read a book, but near the back third of it, the entries changed. They stopped being about the town and started being about one person. The dated entries clustered close together, then further apart, then close again, over a span of years. And they were not accounts at all. They were a man talking to himself, or talking to her. Colleen came to the boardwalk in the spring, the first of them said. Aged out of the county home upstate, no people, nowhere to go, riding the buses down the coast the way they do. Ida found her sleeping under the carousel and brought her to me. I gave her the prize counter. She is good with the children and good with the register, and she does not ask for anything, which is how I know how bad it has been for her. I have seen it before. I was it once. Nora read that line 3 times. I was it once. She is not who this town thinks she is, the next entry said, months later. They see a girl who showed up from nowhere and got herself in trouble with no ring on her hand, and they have their opinions, and they are wrong. She is the best person on this boardwalk and the bravest. She is keeping the baby, and she is keeping her job, and she is doing it alone, and she will not take $1 from me that she has not worked for. I put it in her envelope anyway and tell her the register ran over. And then, dated in the summer Nora would later match to her own first year. The baby's name is Nora. Colleen holds her at the counter while she works, and the regulars have started coming just to see the child. I have not felt this in the Starlite in 20 years. It feels like the place is for something again. Nora had to stop. She put the ledger down on the desk, and she pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes, and she sat with it, the way you sit with a thing that is too large to take in all at once. Then she made herself pick it back up, because she had to know. And there were only a few pages left, and she already understood, the way you understand the end of a story you have somehow always known, that they were not going to be pages about happiness. Colleen collapsed at the counter this afternoon. The entry was dated in the fall of Nora's 5th year, and the even hand had gone unsteady, the letters larger, pressed hard into the paper. The ambulance took 40 minutes to come over the causeway. They are saying it was a bleed in her brain, that it was fast, that there was nothing anyone could have done. She was 24 years old. Nora was in the back with me the whole time, coloring, and does not understand, and I do not know how to tell her. And I am 70 years old, and I do not know how to tell a 5-year-old that her mother is not coming back. Nora read it the way you read something about a stranger, because it was the only way she could get through it, and then she got to the next line, and it stopped being about a stranger. I told them at the hospital I would take her. I told them I had known her mother, that Nora knew me, that this was the only home she had. They said I was not family. They said I was a 70-year-old man with no legal relation and a business the town had already started calling a firetrap, and that the child would go into the county system and be placed properly. They took her upstate. They would not tell me where. I asked to be considered for placement, and the woman looked at me like I was something to be managed. I signed nothing because they gave me nothing to sign. They just took her. Nora's hands were shaking so hard she had to set the book flat on the desk to read the rest. The entries after that were spaced out, months apart, years apart, but they never stopped. Wrote to the county again today. Third letter. No response. Wrote to the state office. They will not release the location of a minor to a non-relative. I understand it. I hate it. Wrote to a lawyer in the county seat who says without a legal relationship there is nothing, that the girl is a ward of the state and will stay one, that the best thing I can do is stop, that these letters could be seen the wrong way by the wrong person. I will not stop. I am putting everything I have into the name Marsh, so that if she ever comes looking, it is here, it is hers, and no one can say it was anything but hers. And then, dated only 2 years back, in a hand grown thin and spidery. The doctor in the county seat gave me a year, maybe less. I have set it all down with Ackerman so it cannot be lost or twisted. Everything goes to Colleen's daughter, Nora Marsh, and if she cannot be found, it holds for her. It does not go to the town or the state or that man Dunmore who has been circling this boardwalk like weather. It waits for her. She was here once. She will come back. Children come back to the last place they were held. That was nearly the final entry. There was one more, in handwriting so faint Nora had to hold the flashlight right against the page. I have sealed the counter room. What is in it is hers. I am tired now. Ida knows to watch for her. If you are reading this, girl, you are home. The register key is under the drawer. I am sorry it took so long. It was never that no one wanted you. I wanted you the whole time. Everyone did. Nora sat in the sealed room for a long time after that. Outside, the heat wave pressed on the boardwalk. Historic, unbroken, over 100 degrees for the 9th day running. Inside the room it was cool and dry and smelled of paper and old metal and, faintly, of pipe tobacco, and Nora Marsh sat in a dead man's chair beneath 9 photographs of her mother and read the last entry over and over until she had it by heart. It was never that no one wanted you. I wanted you the whole time. Everyone did. She thought about the caseworker's note from when she was 9. Nora is quiet but not withdrawn, does not ask for things. And she understood that a 70-year-old man had spent the last years of his life writing letters into a wall of silence, and that he had lost, in the way that people who do everything right sometimes lose, and had died believing she would come back because he could not afford to believe anything else. And she had come back. 3 hours down the coast, with $47 and a broken zipper. Following a name on the back of a photograph, she had walked into the one building on Earth where somebody had been waiting for her. 14 months too late to tell him. That was the part she could not hold. 14 months. She did not cry this time. She had cried already, and there is a kind of grief that goes past crying into something quieter and heavier, and that is where she went, and she stayed there until the light failed. Then she got up, and she put the ledger in her duffel, and she took the photograph of her mother and herself on the counter and held it against her chest, and she went to find Ida, because there was one person left alive in Sable Point who had been there, who had found Colleen sleeping under the carousel, and Nora needed her to say it out loud. Ida was closing up the taffy shop when Nora came in out of the heat with the photograph in her hand. She took one look at Nora's face and set down her rag and turned the sign to closed. and she poured 2 paper cups of ice water and sat Nora down at the little table by the window, and she waited, because Ida Beaumont had lived 74 years and knew when not to talk. Nora slid the photograph across the table. Colleen and Nora on the counter, June, 20 years ago. Ida looked at it for a long moment. Then she took off her reading glasses and pressed her fingers to the bridge of her nose, and when she spoke, her voice was not steady. "I found your mother under that carousel," she said. 19 years old, no shoes, hadn't eaten in 2 days. I brought her to Emmett because Emmett was who you brought people to. That's what nobody understood about that man. She put her glasses back on and looked at Nora over the top of them, fierce suddenly. This whole town thought Emmett Cade was a lonely old miser who never married and never spent a dime and let his arcade rot. And your mother, they thought she was some girl who got herself in trouble and then had the nerve to die and leave a child on the county. That's what they thought. That's what they said. She reached across the table and put her hand flat on the photograph, gently, the way you touch something you have missed. They weren't who people thought. Neither one of them. Not even close. And I have been waiting 14 years for somebody to walk in that door and let me finally say so. You knew, Nora said. You knew who I was. I knew the second you asked about the arcade, Ida said. You've got her chin. You've got her way of not asking for things. Her eyes filled, and she did not bother to hide it. Emmett made me promise. Watch for the Marsh girl, he said. He was sure you'd come. I stopped being sure a long time ago. She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. And then you walked in here looking like something the tide left and asked me who owned the Starlite. And I thought, well, there she is. She came back, just like he said. Nora told Ida about the room then. About the coins and the ledger and the letters and the last entry. I have set it all down with Ackerman so it cannot be lost or twisted. And Ida nodded slowly, because she knew the name. Harold Ackerman had been a lawyer in the county seat for 40 years, mostly retired now, the kind of small-town lawyer who did wills and deeds and knew where the bodies of every old dispute in the county were buried. Emmett had trusted him. If Emmett had set anything down, Ida said, Ackerman would have it, and Ackerman would be the one to tell Nora what her $10 had actually bought her. But that was for the morning. And before the morning, there was one more thing in the sealed room that Nora had not been able to open, and she told Ida about that too. The tall metal cabinet against the back wall, locked, the one thing in the room that had resisted her. Register keys under the drawer, Ida said. That's what he wrote you, isn't it? Under the drawer. Nora went back to the arcade that night with her heart going hard, and she pulled the cash drawer all the way out of the old mechanical register and taped to the underside of it, exactly where a careful man would leave a thing for someone he trusted to find. There was a small envelope, soft with age. Inside were 2 keys and a folded note. The note said only, "Cabinet," and the lockbox inside it. "Take it all to Ackerman. Do not carry it around this town. E.C." The first key opened the tall metal cabinet, and inside, on the shelves, was the rest of it, the part of the collection that had not been out on the open shelves. The gold, cigar boxes of it, and blue books, and dozens of the little hard plastic cases, and Nora did not know then that she was looking at coins with names like St. Gaudens, Double Eagle and Indian Head, and a 1893 Morgan dollar with a small S under the eagle that a man would later go quiet holding. She only knew it was heavy and clean and old, and that it had been kept the way you keep something precious. And at the bottom of the cabinet, the second key opened a gray steel lockbox, and inside the lockbox were the papers. They were not coins, and they were not money. They were the thing the coins were for. There was a deed, the real deed, to the structure, and folded with it, an assignment of the long ground lease that ran under it, both in the name of the Cade estate. There were certificates, thick paper with engraved borders, that Nora would learn were certificates of authenticity and provenance for the most valuable of the coins, each one matched to a coin by a number. There was a typed inventory, 4 pages, of the entire collection, with a column of values in Emmett's small hand that Nora read once and then had to sit down over, because the number at the bottom, The total had a comma in it she had not expected, and then another comma after that. And there was a document, 8 pages, stapled and blue-backed the way legal documents used to be, with a cover that said in typed capitals, "Last Will and Testament of Emmett Arcade," and beneath it, in a paragraph she read 4 times standing up in the dark, the words she had been walking toward her whole life without knowing it. "I give, devise, and bequeath the entirety of my estate, including the real property, the ground lease, and the coin collection inventoried herein, to Nora Marsh, daughter of Colleen Marsh, and if she cannot be located, to be held in trust for her and for no other purpose." Nora did not carry it around the town. She did what the note said. She put it all back in the cabinet and locked it, and slept across the doorway of the sealed room with the register key on a string around her neck. And in the morning she rode the bus inland to the county seat to find a retired lawyer named Harold Ackerman. And she did not know that Royce Dunmore had already heard, the way men like Royce Dunmore always hear, that a girl had bought the Starlite for $10 and started prying open its walls. Harold Ackerman was 81 years old and worked 3 days a week out of an office over a hardware store, mostly to have somewhere to go. When Nora Marsh walked in off the street, sunburned and thin, carrying a green ledger and a photograph and a story, he listened to all of it without interrupting, which is a rare thing in a man of any age. Then he got up and went to a gray filing cabinet in the corner and pulled a folder that had been sitting in it for 2 years, waiting, with a name on the tab in his own hand. Cade, hold for Marsh, N. "I drew that will," he said, sitting back down heavily. Emmett came in every few months for the last 2 years of his life to make sure it still said what he wanted it to say. He was terrified it wouldn't hold, not because it wasn't good. It's airtight. I made sure of that. But because he was terrified they'd never find you, and a will can't give a thing to a person nobody can find. He looked at her over his glasses in a way that reminded her painfully of Ida. "You have any idea how long I've had this folder, Miss Marsh? You have any idea how many times I opened it just to make sure I hadn't dreamed the whole thing?" But there was a problem, and Ackerman laid it out for her plainly, because he was not a man who softened bad news. When Emmett died and no heir could be found, the estate had gone into limbo. The will named Nora. The court could not locate Nora, and an estate cannot sit open forever. Because the will could not be carried out, the condemned building had passed, as the only unclaimed thing it could, to Emmett's last living relative, his half-brother Vernon, who had never wanted it and had spent a year trying to give it away. Which meant that when Vernon signed the arcade over to Nora for $10, he had, without either of them understanding it, handed the girl the very thing his brother's will had been trying to put in her hands all along. "It's a mess," Ackerman said. "But it's a fixable mess, because your holding that deed is, frankly, the best thing that could have happened. You hold the structure now, free and clear, in your own name, and the will gives you all the rest. The coins were never Vernon's to keep or lose. They're personal property of the estate, and the estate is yours. We petition the court. We present the will. We present you. We present." He tapped the ledger. "This, which no judge on earth is going to read without needing a minute. And I'd expect it to go through clean." He took off his glasses. "Unless somebody contests it, and I think you already know somebody's going to try." He was right. Royce Dunmore contested it 4 days later. Nora learned what Royce Dunmore wanted from Ackerman, who had watched the man circle the Sable Point boardwalk for the better part of 10 years. Dunmore built things, condominiums, and the kind of shopping that goes underneath them, up and down the coast. He had been buying failing boardwalk parcels one at a time, waiting for the whole run to collapse so he could take the last dead stretch, the arcade and the 2 vacant lots on either side of it, and put up something with balconies and a parking structure and a name that had the word Shores in it. The only thing that had ever stood in his way was Emmett Cade, who owned the anchor parcel and would not sell, and who quietly held the mortgages of half the shops Dunmore wanted to see fail so that they did not, in fact, fail. When Emmett died, Dunmore had thought his moment had finally come. The old man was gone, and the arcade had landed on a broke, ailing half-brother 3 towns away who wanted nothing but to be rid of it, exactly the kind of seller Dunmore had spent a career waiting for. He had a preliminary agreement with 2 members of the town council, contingent on his getting the Cade parcel and clearing the condemned structure off it, and for 14 months he had been patiently wearing Vernon down toward a signature, 1 phone call at a time. And then, before Dunmore could get that signature, Vernon Cade gave the building to a 19-year-old girl for $10. A girl who walked into Harold Ackerman's office with the one thing that could unmake all of it, a claim to be Emmett's heir. So Dunmore's lawyer filed to contest the will, and the grounds he chose told Nora everything about the man. He did not argue that Emmett had been incompetent, because the ledger and Ackerman's records made that impossible. He argued that Nora Marsh could not prove she was Nora Marsh, daughter of Colleen Marsh. He argued that a girl with no fixed address, a foster history, and no living relatives was exactly the kind of person who might turn up claiming to be a dead man's heir when a dead man's fortune came to light. He demanded proof. He demanded records. He was betting, coldly and not unreasonably, that a girl who had been passed through a dozen homes with everything she owned in garbage bags would not be able to produce a clean chain of documents proving who her mother was, and that while she tried, the clock would run out, her claim would collapse, and the last dead stretch of boardwalk would fall back into the limbo where he could finally get his hands on it, and his balconies would go up over the place where Colleen Marsh had once handed children their prizes. He had made one mistake. He did not know about the room. The hearing was in the county courthouse, in a small courtroom with bad air conditioning that lost its fight with the heat wave by 10 in the morning. Ackerman presented the will. He presented Nora's case file, subpoenaed from the state, which listed on its very first page, in the county's own records, mother, Colleen Marsh, deceased, and Nora's date and place of birth, which was a hospital 40 minutes over the causeway from Sable Point. He presented the photograph from Nora's pocket, and the 9 photographs from the wall of the sealed room, and he laid them out on the table in a row so that the judge could see, without anyone having to say a word, the same chin and the same eyebrows moving down through 20 years from the woman behind the counter to the young woman sitting at the plaintiff's table with her hands folded and her back straight. And then he presented the ledger. He did not read all of it. He read 3 entries. He read the one that said the baby's name is Nora. He read the one that said, I am putting everything I have into the name Marsh, so that if she ever comes looking, it is here, it is hers. And he read the last one. It was never that no one wanted you. I wanted you the whole time. Everyone did. And by the time he finished the 3rd entry, the courtroom was very quiet, and the judge, a woman in her 60s who had grown up 2 towns over and remembered the Starlite when its letters all lit, took a long moment before she spoke, and when she spoke, she asked Dunmore's lawyer, in a flat voice, whether his client wished to continue arguing that this young woman was not who the entire record plainly showed her to be. The lawyer asked for a recess to confer with his client. And it was during that recess, in the hot marble hallway outside the courtroom, that the thing happened which the town would talk about for years afterward, and which was the real reason Nora Marsh won, not the will and not the ledger, but what she chose to do with what she knew. Because Nora had read the whole ledger. Every page. And she had found, 40 pages back, in an entry dated the year she herself was born, 3 lines in Emmett's small, even hand that she had not told Ackerman about, and had not told Ida about, and had told no one about, because she had been deciding what kind of person she was going to be. The dress shop at the North End is going under, the entry said. Margaret can't make the taxes 2 years running, and she's too proud to say so, with the husband gone and the boy to raise, paid them through the town again. She'll think it's a clerical break. The boy is a hard case, angry, but he's her whole world, and she is doing it alone. I know something about a town raising a child that isn't its own. Margaret Dunmore. The dress shop at the North End. The boy who was a hard case, angry, being raised alone by a widow who could not make her taxes, the boy who had grown up to be Royce Dunmore, the man now standing at the other end of a marble hallway trying to prove that a foster kid was a fraud so he could put a parking structure over her mother's grave in all but name. Emmett Cade had quietly kept Royce Dunmore's mother's shop alive when Royce was a child, had paid her taxes through the town so she would never feel the shame of it. Royce had grown up on the invisible generosity of the exact man whose estate he was now trying to take from the exact kind of orphan he had once, in a smaller and safer way, been himself. And he did not know it. He had spent 10 years fighting a dead man he thought was just a stubborn old miser, and he had never known that the old miser had once stood between his own mother and ruin, and asked for nothing, and written it down only so that the accounts would stay honest. Nora had the ledger with her in the hallway. She had thought a great deal, in the days before the hearing, about this exact moment, because she had known it would come. She could stand up in that courtroom and read the entry aloud. She could put Royce Dunmore's whole childhood on the record. The widowed mother, the taxes he never knew were paid for him, the charity he had been living on before he could even read. She could make the man who had called her a fraud sit in a hot courtroom in front of a judge and a reporter from the county paper, and learn, in public, that everything he was had been built on the quiet mercy of the man he was trying to rob. It would have been true. It would have been fair, in the way that revenge dresses itself up as fair. And it would have destroyed him. She did not do it. She waited until the recess, and she walked down the hot marble hallway to where Royce Dunmore stood with his lawyer, and she asked if she could speak to him alone. The lawyer started to object, and Dunmore, for reasons he probably did not understand himself, waved him off. And Nora Marsh, 19 years old, who had spent her whole life being taught not to ask for things and not to be noticed, opened the green ledger to a page she had marked with a strip of paper and turned it around so he could read it, and said only, "I think you should see this." "I don't think anyone else needs to." She watched him read it. She watched him read the dress shop at the North End is going under. She watched him get to Margaret, can't make the taxes and go still. She watched him read the boy is a hard case, angry, but he's her whole world. And she watched a man in his 50s, tanned and certain and armored, read 3 lines in a dead man's handwriting and understand, all at once, who had actually raised him. He read it twice. His hand, when he reached out to touch the page, was not steady. "He never said anything," Dunmore said. His voice had gone strange. 50 years. He never once. He stopped. "I used to think he hated me. I used to think he wouldn't sell just to spite me." "He didn't hate you," Nora said. "He knew something about a town raising a child that wasn't its own. It's the next line. You can read it." Dunmore read the next line. Then he closed the ledger, gently, the way you close something that does not belong to you, and he handed it back to her. And for a long moment the two of them stood in the hot hallway, the orphan the town had raised on charity, and the orphan the town had let disappear, and neither of them said anything, because there was nothing to say that the old man had not already said better, 40 years ago, in a sealed room, for no one. Royce Dunmore withdrew his challenge that afternoon. He did it quietly, with no explanation to his lawyer or the counsel or the paper, and the estate of Emmett Cade passed to Nora Marsh, daughter of Colleen Marsh, clean and whole and without further argument. The judge signed the order in a courtroom that had gone soft and quiet, and Ackerman took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes for a long time, and Ida Beaumont, who had driven 40 minutes inland in a car with no air conditioning to sit in the gallery, cried without making any sound at all, the way the women in that town had learned to do. The appraisal came 3 weeks later. Emmett had a name written in the front of the inventory, a coin dealer in the city, an old and honest one, and Ackerman brought the man down himself, and he spent 2 days in the sealed room with cotton gloves and a loop and a scale, and he was not a man given to display. But there were coins that made him go quiet and set them down carefully and step back from the desk. There was a silver dollar from 1893 with a small S beneath the eagle that he held for a long time without speaking. There was a dime from 1916 with a tiny D that he called, softly, a coin most collectors never touch in their lives. There were gold pieces, the double eagles, $20 coins that had not been $20 coins in a very long time, and boxes of silver dollars in a condition he said you did not find anymore because people had spent them or melted them or worn them smooth. When he was done, he sat down with Nora and Ackerman and slid a single sheet of paper across the desk with a number written at the bottom, and the number was $612,000, and he said, in the careful voice of an honest man, that it would likely bring more than that from the right buyers, and that in his 40 years he had rarely seen a private collection assembled with such patience by someone who so plainly never meant to sell. $612,000, and the arcade, and the ground lease, and the 2 vacant lots on either side that the lease had quietly carried all along. Nora Marsh, who had stepped off a bus in Sable Point with $47 and a broken zipper, was not poor anymore. She would never be poor again. She did not sell the collection. She sold 6 coins. She talked it through with Ackerman and with Ida and with the honest man from the city, and she chose 6. Not the rarest. The ones Emmett had noted in the ledger he had bought as workhorses to be spent when the town needed spending. And she sold them, and it was enough. It was enough to pay the back taxes clean and lift the condemnation off the Starlite. It was enough to fix the sagging roof and rewire the old machines and replace the cracked neon so that the marquee, for the first time in years, spelled out the whole word again, Starlite Arcade. It was enough, when she went quietly to the town and asked the right questions, to do a few other things that no one was ever told about, because Nora had read the whole ledger and understood exactly how the man had done it. The carousel's motor, the bait shop's roof, a fisherman's engine. And it was enough, quietly, to move Vernon Cade out of his rented room into a small, clean place with a porch and a fan, and to see that his fines were paid and his months came easier. The old man who had signed away a fortune for $10 because he would not sell his brother's arcade to a voice he did not trust, and who never once asked her for a thing. She kept the accounts in the back of the same green book, in her own hand under his, and she told the people not to mention it, and told them the arcade had simply had a good season, and some of them believed her, and some of them knew better, and none of them said so, which was exactly how Emmett Cade had wanted it. The Starlite reopened on a Saturday in September, after the heat wave had finally broken and the air off the water had gone clean and cool again. Nora did not make a speech. She was not a girl who made speeches, but she did one thing. Above the prize counter, where the old sign had said prizes in gold, she hung a photograph, enlarged and framed, the one of Colleen Marsh sitting on the counter with a 6-month-old baby in a yellow onesie reaching up toward her face, and underneath it, on a small brass plate, it said only, Colleen Marsh worked this counter. Emmett Cade built this place. Ask them what a prize is worth. And below the counter, where the ledger said the register key had been taped there for more than a year, waiting, she kept a bowl of quarters, and any child who came in without money got a roll of them, free, the way Emmett had done it for 51 years, and no one was ever told why. Royce Dunmore did not build his balconies. He came to the reopening. He stood at the back for a while, in a golf shirt the color of a swimming pool, watching the machines light up and the children run between the rows. And before he left, he put an envelope on the prize counter and did not wait to be thanked. And when Nora opened it later, there was no note, only a photograph, old and creased, of a woman standing in front of a dress shop at the north end of the boardwalk, with a boy of about 7 scowling at her side. She pinned it to the corkboard in the sealed room, next to the others, because it belonged there, and because the room was not really a treasure room. It never had been. It was a room for keeping the people a town owed and never knew it. Nora Marsh lived the rest of her life in Sable Point. She ran the Starlite for a long time, and she was good with the children and good with the register, and she did not ask for anything. And the town that had once let her mother disappear came, slowly, over the years, to understand what it had almost lost twice, and to be ashamed of it, and to be grateful. She never did learn to make speeches, but on quiet nights, after the machines went dark and the ocean came up through the walls, she would sit in the swivel chair in the sealed room, under 9 photographs of her mother, with a silver dollar warming in her fist, and she would open the green ledger and read the last thing he ever wrote to her, and she came to understand it differently than she had that first blistering afternoon. It was never that no one wanted you. I wanted you the whole time. Everyone did. The prize counter at the Starlite had always given back more than it took. That was the whole secret of it. The thing Emmett Cade knew, and Colleen Marsh knew, and Nora Marsh learned at 19 behind a wall she pried open with a borrowed hammer in the worst heat in 40 years, that the people who quietly hold a place together are almost never the ones the place remembers, and that the surest way to be truly rich is to spend your whole life making sure no one ever finds out how much they owe you, and to keep the accounts honest anyway, in a small, even hand, in the dark, for the one person who might someday come home and need to know they had been wanted all along.